Hey there, guys. Hey, so I was doing a little bit of research here today, preparing for another project that should come up here in probably a couple weeks on the channel at least. And there's something I wanted to talk about with all of you guys really quickly. So I was taking a look over at the 1986 Mets. And the guy who I was looking at who really caught my attention, it wasn't this mess that they had over in center field. It was this guy, Wally Backman. So, yeah, the 86 Mets were an interesting team with Davey Johnson at the helm. I'm too young to remember this team. I was only 2 years old in 1986. But I'll tell you something. When you go look at their batting order, you notice a couple of strange things. And one of the things that surprised me, having known the World Series so well, is that Johnson decided to platoon Backman with Tim Tuffle. And that's something that kind of surprised me because I know almost like naturally know that Backman was a much better hitter than Tim Tuffle was, at least in '86. Pretty good OPS plus, mostly because of good on-base percentage and the ability to slug the ball. He was kind of off and on for some of these years, as you can see. But overall was a pretty good hitter in those terms. And in terms of WAR, too, he was generally a positive player and a positive contributor. Tuffle, on the other hand, I mean, he did have some years that were better, I guess, a little bit later on, especially when, look at this. He's always platooning, though, especially when he gets a little bit more playing time, but not necessarily. And his WAR was a little bit more sort of a middling type thing. It is also not so surprising. I mean, we don't like to look at batting average these days, right? But when you just look at the other statistics, you can see that while you do have a good year here and a good time with Minnesota playing in the Dome, overall for the Mets, it wasn't exactly the most wonderful experience in the world. And as far as his fielding prowess is concerned, I think that Backman pretty clearly is a better fielder, at least in 85, 86, 87. There were some questions, I think, too, about Wally Backman's fielding. But the question that I have is, was this the right decision to make, right? I mean, I know it's kind of weird to go look at a season that was played, it's been like 30, whatever years, 37 years or something like that, right? And go back and look at this and be like, why were they doing that? But that's the thing I've been asking myself today, right? And I'll sort of show you here what's going on. So it's obvious when you look at the batting order that Johnson did not want to have Backman hitting against lefties. But he did hit against lefties in 86. So we go look at his splits. You can see here from the splits that Backman, was hitting very, very well against right-handed pitching and not well at all against left-handed pitching. You look at that and you say, okay, well, that explains it. That explains the reason why, they were platooning the way that they were. There are a couple of things about this that are really silly, though. So one of them is that actually Wally Backman, we look at how he was doing against left-handed starting pitchers, was hitting quite well against them. I don't know if this is because he was coming into games later. I'm guessing that's what's happening. You can see only 2 games started here, right? So I'm guessing that this is because he's coming in later on when the guy's a little bit fatigued or something like that. But that's an interesting thing to note, right? That it kind of does make you ask, well, maybe he would do better if you had him starting against them. The other thing to pay attention to, which is the thing that weirds me out here, is that Wally Backman, of course, was a switch hitter, right? So if you're going to platoon him, why are you platooning with a guy who's a switch hitter, right? That doesn't make any sense. And, of course, he came up with the Mets, and when you go back here and take another look at this, he was always platooned, right? He doesn't have any time when he wasn't platooned. He was always part of a platoon. He gets this number of games, I guess 85, maybe not so much, but he gets this number of games played mostly because he's coming in as a pinch hitter late in the game, right? Tim Tuffle, meanwhile, when you go look at his splits, and we'll just take a look at these splits together here, 486 specifically. Tuffle's splits are still not better against lefties, right? He's right-handed, of course, because he's a second baseman. I've said this before. If you're an infielder, you're going to be right-handed. You're not going to be left-handed. I learned that when I was a kid. So he's got the starts against left-handed starters, right? He's got all of the starts basically against left-handed starters, but he's not hitting so well against them. He does better against right-handed pitching, right? Now, I guess that Tuffle was marginally better than Backman against lefties, right? Definitely when you're looking against all left-handed pitching, you got to remember that this is mostly because you're not going to bring Backman in to face a left-handed pitcher, right? This is after Backman's come into the game and when he's got a second at bat or when the game is extended or something like that. Interesting to see how that goes. And like I said, again, when you look at the OPS, against left-handed starters for Backman, oh, look at that, it's better than Tuffle's OPS against left-handed starters, right? Which is part of my question, which is why are you doing this? Why are you giving yourself this problem? Why not have the young kid Backman be the starter for every single game? That's one of the big questions I have. Now, I know a lot of you guys are older, and many of you guys may have actually like followed this team and watched them closely, but it's an interesting thing, I think, to look at, and it's something that I was looking at, like I said earlier today, and thinking a lot about. Other thing I want to show you here are the career splits for both of these players. And this is where you'll start realizing that those season-by-season splits are usually just statistical noise. And this is what I hate to see. I hate to see like important decisions like this being made based on statistical noise that doesn't mean much. And that's exactly what this is, right? You go down here and you look at Backman. Now, there is a difference definitely in the splits between lefties and righties, but he's hitting against lefties. And when you look at this against left-handed starters, that difference is very, very small. There is a difference in batting average. I mean, almost a 50-point difference. The difference here, though, in the OPS numbers, while it is there, is not quite as large. It's not quite as obvious. It's not quite as like we look at this and say, yeah, he just couldn't hit against lefties. While he could hit somewhat against lefties, I do think that he was at a disadvantage. The question here is, I mean, one of the reasons why he's probably not hitting so well against lefties is because he's not hitting right-handed that often, right? He's usually hitting left-handed because he's up against right-handed pitching. That's probably what's happening, right? He's trying to switch head, and for whatever reason, he's better from the left side than from the right. For whatever reason, I don't know. I'm not a switch hitter. When you go compare that here to Tim Tuffle, though, again, you can see, I mean, I suppose that Tuffle was better overall in terms of OPS against lefties in his career. But, whether this is an extraordinarily large margin is another question. And again, he was not as good against lefties as he was against righties overall. Although I guess he was actually, when you look at this, if you compare these numbers directly. So it's possible that Johnson was actually onto something. But anyway, that's sort of my point here, though, in the end. So this is the problem that you have in general in baseball when you're looking at these split numbers and when you're trying to make decisions based on them. In general, like the chances that you have stumbled across a difference in splits that are like actually like really meaningful, or that is meaningful, and that really, means that this guy is not very good against, whatever, lefties or righties or whatever, the chances of that happening are very, very slim. Like, I guess it does happen, but per like the history of the sport, it doesn't happen that often, right? And the more you investigate and you look into lefty-righty splits, the more you realize that these individual season differences in lefty-righty splits oftentimes can be caused actually by managerial decisions, right? And might be caused by something else, right? While there is certainly a difference, and a generic difference in having like a left-handed hitter hit against a left-handed pitcher and having a righty hit against a lefty, right? That difference is not quite as acute and is not as meaningful as some people would have you believe. That's something I think to really keep in mind, because when it comes to a lot of these games that we play, as well as I do, that the big trend these days is to make sure that everybody's got their lefty-righty splits in and that everything is based upon those splits. We kind of have a problem with that, and the problem that we have is that there's a really good chance that we're creating games and we're fine-tuning them based on things that statistically are completely meaningless. Right. And again, it's a question of, well, why are we doing all of this work if it doesn't mean anything in the end? So anyway, I'd love to know what you think about that, what you think about the topic. And we're probably going to have a little bit more meanderings and, unchanneled, unbridled thoughts about this here in the future. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Hope you have a good day. Bye-bye.